Hi, it's Courtney and welcome. I am back with another design team project for Scrapping for Less. Today I'm using a stamp set by Sunny Studio called Critter Campout. I am going to be creating another scene here, but this time I'm going to be playing around with some directional lighting, which I've never tried before, so this is my first time. I started by stamping out my images and masking them with Eclipse masking paper. I'm using jet black ink by Lawn Fawn because I will be Copic coloring my images. And I'm stamping on a piece of Nina Solar White 80-pound cardstock. Whatever image you want to be in front of another, you want to stamp out first, mask that out, and then stamp whatever image will be behind it. Also, when you cut out your masks, you want to make sure that you're cutting right along that black line. Otherwise, after you do your ink blending and remove your masks, you'll have a white outline around your images. It's usually no big deal. You can usually go in with your marker to fix that. I masked out all my images with the masking paper, other than this little stick with the sausage or hot dog on the end of it. I used liquid Frisket. It was just too small of an image to cut out. Once all of my masks were down, I took a piece of Post-it note tape and masked out the bottom part of my card. I'll be doing some ink blending to create my sky. I also die cut a piece of the paper with just a circle die, and I placed that in the corner. This will be where my moon is. And I started off with Faded Jeans, which is actually my lightest color, and I'll concentrate around the moon. That'll be the lightest part of the sky. And then I'll blend that out with Chipped Sapphire. And at the end, I'll bring in the black soot all the way to the left. My mask of that little raccoon, the little ear, kept coming up, but I'll go ahead and fix that after we remove our masks. Once my sky was done, I removed that circle and just added a little bit of Distress ink in the color Pumice Stone. I just pounced on my ink blending tool just to give it a little color. I didn't want to completely cover up the white. Next, I took another piece of Post-it note tape and masked out that sky. And I'll be doing some ink blending with peeled paint and mustard seed Distress inks. This is just a base layer. I'm going to be covering this up with grass later on, but this helps me, guides me as far as colors go, darkest to lightest. I wanted to keep that area around the fire the lightest color. Once I removed all of my masks, I did realize that that little ear of the raccoon was completely black. And I'm not working on watercolor paper here, but I know that if you do add water to Distress ink, it at least lightens the color by quite a bit. So I just took a damp paintbrush. It wasn't soaking wet, otherwise my paper would be destroyed. So I just took a damp paintbrush and blotted that up with a paper towel. It didn't completely take out the color, but it did lighten it enough where I could go back in with my Copics later. For my coloring, I started off by taking my Y02 and just kind of mapping out where I wanted those highlights to be, which will be whatever part of these little critters or the tent that's closest to the fire. I'll end up covering most of this yellow up later, but this will kind of give me a guide so I don't go too far with my darkest colors. So I started off with the tent, and I am just taking my lightest color here and just mapping out where my darkest areas will end up being. The darkest areas for this one will be off to the right, and above this little bear that's sleeping, he would cast a shadow onto the tent. I go in with my darkest color and basically just go over where I had laid out the lightest. I'm using flicking motions here just because it does make it a little bit easier to blend. I'll go in with my 2 mid-tone colors, and then I'll go back to my lightest color. When I do go back to my lightest color, I won't take it all the way to the edge because I do want to preserve a little bit of that yellow. So once I have that lightest color down, I'll go back in with my Y02 just to make that a little bit more noticeable. Next, for the little critters, I went a little bit darker than I normally would. Being this scene is at night, they wouldn't appear as light as they would normally. So I'm basically doing the same thing. I'm starting off with my lightest color, laying out where my darkest areas will be and where my shadows will be, and then going in with my darkest, then my midtones, and then my lightest. And I am still trying to preserve that yellow area. Maybe not as much as I put the yellow down initially, but I do preserve a little bit of that. For the white areas of these animals, I went in, I usually will add a C3 and a C1 just to add shadows, but I went a little bit darker this time. Like I said, because this is at night, they would appear darker. It wouldn't actually be white. So I'm not leaving any white on any of these animals. Next, for the fire itself, I just took a variety of markers here. I'm using a red, an orange, and 2 yellows. And I'm starting off with my red and just putting that in the center where the hottest part of the fire would be. Then I'll blend that out with my YR marker and then my 2 Y markers. Last, for the grass, I took some darker green markers. I'm using the YG90s. And I'm going to start with my darkest color here and just doing fast little flicks just randomly around the edge of my card. This is where the darkest area will be. This is the area that's furthest away from that fire. And then I'll gradually go down. This is the YG99. And next I will take my YG97 and just add more flicks right over where I put my YG99 and then extend those out a little bit further. Next, for my YG95, I'll take those out even further, and I'll preserve that area around the fire from my YG93, which is my lightest color. The edge of the card wasn't quite dark enough for me, so I did go in with my warm gray marker here and just went around just the edges to make them even darker. Next, for the sky, there are little star stamps in this set. So I'm using my Versamark here and just stamping a few of those out in the sky. And I'm using some glitter embossing powder here just to add a little bit of interest to that sky. For my sentiment, I am using VersaFine ink and clear embossing powder, and I will go ahead and stamp that into the lower left-hand corner. I decided to emboss this just because it's such a dark color card to begin with, that I just wanted the sentiment to pop up a little bit. And that is it for today. Thank you so much for joining me, and I hope you guys have a great day.